My name is Tim. I'm a 20-year-old male living on the West Coast. I work the closing shift at McDonald's, a horror story all on its own, and arrive home at around 2 a.m. I live alone, but have a black lab that is 2 years old. When I get home after work, my normal routine is to shower, change, then take Doobie for a walk around the neighborhood. I had just gotten home after a long night and went about my routine. I put the leash on Doob, grabbed my keys and my cell phone for a light, and took off into the night. About 4 blocks from my place is a park. On the back side of the park is a heavily wooded forest that goes about 300 feet or so before opening back up into an area that is the local community college. Doobie and I made our way to the park with no issues, and without seeing a soul. At this point, I decided to let my dog off the leash to roam more freely while I went and sat on the swings to text a friend. That was an idiot mistake. Doobie is a really good dog, but has almost no training. Time and time again I find myself thinking that he will stick around if I let him loose, to which I always find myself disappointed. He took off back towards home, and I was yelling at him to come back. No surprise, he kept on his merry way. I figured he was on his way home, and decided to sit and text my friend and relax a few in the cool air. I find this really helps to ease one's mind after a long, hard day. At least it helps me. I was sitting on the swings for a couple of minutes with only the sound of the branches swaying and a little bit of moonlight to keep me company, when I started hearing a different sound coming from the woods. It sounded like something smacking against a tree. I was thinking it was a branch or something, but still wanted to look to make sure. I looked back towards the woods searching for movement, but I couldn't make any branches out clearly to confirm that's what it was making the sounds. I really wasn't worried about it much, due to the fact that I've been going to this park almost every night for the past 3 months, never once having an incident worth worrying over. I turn my head back to my phone and send another text, when I hear the same sound, only much louder and faster. At this point, I came to the conclusion that this wasn't just a branch making that sound, because the wind had not picked up at all, yet the sound keeps getting louder and faster. I jump up out of the swing and face the woods. I strain my eyes to try and spot anything moving in the tree line, and the sound stops entirely, leaving an almost eerie silence. I am a huge horror buff, and like many, I am always calling the people in the movies that investigate weird sound in the dark idiots. In my mind, that was the last thing I was about to do. I start feeling butterflies in my stomach, and that almost tingly feeling in my limbs. Hello? Is somebody there? As I said before, I wasn't about to go investigate, but there was about 30 feet between me and the tree line, so I figured if someone was trying to jump me, I would have enough time to make a mad dash out of there before they could catch me. I stood there in silence, waiting to see if anyone would respond. That was when I heard twigs snapping and branches shaking. The butterflies intensified as I saw movement at the tree line. As if out of nowhere, I see a white silhouette at the tree line. My first thought was that I was seeing a ghost, until it stepped out of the trees and paused at the edge of the grass. It was a fucking clown. Not a normal carnival clown, but more of the run-of-the-mill horror movie clown. Surprisingly, that actually wasn't the first thing I noticed when seeing this person. In their right hand, they were clutching a machete. Within a fraction of a second, my mind was flooded with an overwhelming amount of thoughts. Holy fuck, I'm about to die. And I just heard about this on the news, but I thought all the clown sightings were on the East Coast. And a lot more that I really can't remember. It all happened really fast, but the next thing I remember is screaming in my own head to run. It was almost as if the clown read my mind, because it took off running towards me just as I spun around to run. "I just want to play," he screamed at me, letting me know that I was in fact dealing with a male. I kinda figured, but it honestly made it even more scary, on top of his complete cliché horror movie quote. I can't describe the fear I felt at that moment, but I started screaming at the top of my lungs for help as I sprinted down the residential streets. I didn't care if it was almost 3 in the morning. I was seriously getting chased down by the living and breathing Pennywise. I was maybe a block and a half from my house now, and I could hear his heavy footsteps and breathing behind me. I shot a glance over my shoulder, and he actually wasn't as close as he sounded. He seemed to be about 40 feet behind me, and no longer appeared to be in a dead sprint. I didn't care. I kept screaming my head off and running full speed home. I made it about another half a block before I heard a familiar sound. Doobie was barking and running towards me from the direction of our house. I expected him to run past me and go attack this clown chasing me, but he came up to me in a concerned way and started trotting next to me. Me, being a little baffled and somewhat relieved my dog wasn't chasing a machete-wielding clown, once again looked over my shoulder to see how far away the clown was. I couldn't see him anymore. It was as if he vanished. I was a little awestruck with how fast he had disappeared, but not any less thankful. I kept pace back to my place and rushed Doobie inside before locking the door and finally calling the police. I am pretty sure I wouldn't have called while running, in fear of being slowed down, but I hadn't even thought about calling them until I was locking my front door. I told the dispatcher what happened and wasn't sure if I was followed home. She stayed on the phone with me until the police arrived only a few moments later. I remember being surprised with how fast their response time was, later finding out that one of my neighbors had actually called the police after hearing me screaming. I told them exactly what happened and gave them the best description I could, though I was pretty confident they would be able to identify a clown walking around this late at night. Not like this is an everyday thing to see. Well, I guess it kinda is now. They told me they would be making patrols of the area and to call if I saw him again. And that was that. I never heard anything after that, and never saw any news stories of a clown being arrested in our area, so I am left to assume that he was never caught. I had been hearing about clown stories for a week or two leading up to this point, and have since heard of news stories every day. I'm not sure what is causing this sudden outbreak of clown appearances, whether it be copycats, a new prank tactic, or whatever, but I hope it stops soon. The last thing I want to say is, fuck clowns. When this happened, I was with my Uncle Rick and his wife Sarah, not their real names. Uncle Rick was a captain in the military as a military police officer at the Lackland Air Force Base. His uncle was the sheriff in a small town in Texas. My Uncle Rick and Aunt Sarah were loved by all in their town, since they were always the first ones to help their neighbors in need and volunteered for town activities. Until this night at the carnival. It was a late summer day in Texas, and my Aunt Sarah and Uncle Rick wanted to take their children to a carnival that was in town. I just turned 8, and I was the youngest of the group. My oldest cousin Kyle was 15, my cousin Anna 13, and me. When we drove up, I was fascinated by all the lights, sounds, and the smell of the carnival food. We were there for an hour, and my uncle saw his uncle all dressed up in his police uniform. My uncle was in civilian clothes, but he had his sidearm somewhere on his person. I wanted to go on the Ferris wheel, while my cousins wanted to go on the roundup. My aunt volunteered to take me to the Ferris wheel, and my uncle took my cousins to the roundup. I caught a glimpse of a man dressed in a clown suit following me and my aunt. Every time I would turn around, he would be behind us. I pulled on my aunt's sleeve and said, "Auntie, that clown is following us." My aunt turned around, and the clown saw her look at him, and he turned around and walked away. She then took my arm and dragged me to find my uncle. We made a wrong turn, and we were in a walkway between the tents and booths. The walkway was almost abandoned, and it was dark. While dragging me by my arm, my aunt ran down the walkway trying to find a way out. Suddenly, there was a voice out of the dark that said, "You look lost, and your boy looks nice." My aunt turned around to see who said that, and it was the clown that was following us. I saw something shiny in the clown's hand. It looked like a butcher's knife. My aunt pushed me through a slit in one of the tents, and she followed. The guy in the tent looked shocked, because we were in the middle of some games where the prizes were stuffed animals. The guy in the tent looks at my aunt and asked what was wrong. My aunt told him about this clown that was following us with a knife. The guy had this odd look on his face like he didn't believe her. My aunt picked me up and threw me over the table, and she followed. My Uncle Rick happened to walk by at the same time I landed at his feet from my aunt throwing me over the table. After my aunt got over, she started to cry, and through her tears she told him what happened. My uncle got this furious look on his face, and it is one look I will never forget. My uncle called one of the officers that was walking around. When more police officers came, one of them escorted my aunt, me, and my cousins back to the truck. After my aunt and I gave my uncle a description, my uncle told my aunt to just drive home. My uncle and the police stopped and questioned every clown at the carnival, but they didn't find the clown that was stalking us. Later that night, my uncle came home and told us that a boy went missing at the carnival that night and was last seen with a clown. There were rumors around town that the clown was a local man who lived on the outskirts of town. The police searched his property and house, but found nothing. Though they found nothing, people were weary around him when he came into town. To this day, they have not been able to locate the boy or the clown. I'm 28 today, and even though this event happened 20 years ago, I still cannot see a clown or a sign for a carnival without having a cold feeling and a shiver go down my spine. I still hear those words clearly as that night. "You look lost, and your boy looks nice," with that creepy smile on his face. That was the last time my uncle and aunt took my cousins to a carnival. If it wasn't for my aunt's quick thinking and her being fast on her feet, I don't believe that I would be alive today. One Friday afternoon, my aunt and a group of her friends were walking home together from school. They all lived relatively close to one another, but it was about a 30-minute walk home from school. They were all talking about what they were going to be doing that weekend and making plans to go bowling or to the movies. Earlier in this week, there had been reports of an unknown van driving around with a man dressed in a clown suit, scaring, harassing, and even kidnapping kids. He called himself Homie the Clown. My aunt and her friends were all cautious of their surroundings, and as they continued their walk, a couple of other kids came running up and shouting, "He's coming! He's coming!" My aunt asked, "Who's coming?" And they responded with, "Homie the Clown." Seconds later, they see a white van speeding towards the group of teens. The clown is laughing hysterically. Everyone takes off running as the clown is tailing them. My aunt drops her backpack and books it home. When she gets inside, she grabs a knife and calls my grandma and tells her what happened. My grandma worked about an hour away, and my grandfather wouldn't be home for about another 2 hours. My grandmother told my aunt to lock the doors, close the windows, and hide in her room. About 15 minutes had passed, and my aunt decided to peek out the window into the hallway upstairs, which faced the street. What she saw next made her heart drop. It was the clown, in the same exact van, slowly driving down the street she lived on. As he got close to the front of my aunt's house, the van stopped. He parked, got out, and proceeded to walk towards my aunt's house. My aunt started to panic. The clown jumped the fence and started peeking inside all of the windows. He went around to the back of the house and started knocking. My aunt is shaking with fear, and what she heard next will haunt her for the rest of her life. "I know you're in there. I saw you run inside earlier. Open up the door, sweetie," followed by the most disturbing laugh. My aunt stayed quiet. Minutes passed, and he started to mess with the doorknob. Nothing. He walked around the house a bit more and continued to laugh in the most disturbing way. Then, my aunt decides to peek out the window and sees the clown walk to his van, turns around, looks up at the window my aunt was looking out of, and he smiles and blows her a kiss. Then he gets in his van and drives off. My aunt is terrified. She was too afraid to go downstairs and grab the house phone. Luckily, my grandmother had already made the call to the police when they got off the phone, and was told that they were sending a few patrol cars to search the area. The next morning, my grandparents were eating breakfast and listening to the news. They heard something about a van and a clown, and turned the volume up. The reporter stated that 2 teens, who were brother and sister, were found dead in a nearby creek. The man was caught parked a couple of blocks away in a parking lot. He was inside the van removing the makeup off his face. The cops had searched his van and found some of the clothes that belonged to the teens in there, along with some tape, rope, and a mattress in the back of his van that was stained in blood. The man was sentenced to life in prison. My name is Dominic, Dom for short. This is something that didn't happen to me personally, but to my stepmother Deanie and her 2 kids, and my neighbors at the time. This all happened before she ever met my dad. There are 2 parts to this story. I tried to find an article pertaining to the second story, but I had no luck. My stepmom went to a birthday party for one of her friends. She had brought my sister Kayla and my bro Oscar, who I think she said were 6, Kayla, and 13, Oscar. They had the children downstairs in the basement with some of the older kids, playing, watching movies and whatnot, and the adults upstairs partying, drinking, and having fun. She said it was about 1 in the morning when everyone started to either go to bed or have their DDs take them home. 2 of the kids, one of them being Oscar, had come downstairs with a look on their face like they had seen a ghost. Oscar said that someone was knocking on the sliding glass door, dressed up as a clown. The adults all ran upstairs and saw the man just standing there, smiling. I don't remember who she said, but someone grabbed the hidden gun from a cabinet and pointed it at the door. You can already imagine, the man ran away. They called the police, who said that nothing could be done, but they'll do their best to keep a lookout. That was just the first part of the story. The next part took place a few years later. My dad and Deanie had gotten married, and Kayla and Oscar had gotten a bit older. I had just graduated from Army basic training and AIT. I was waiting for my orders to Germany so that I could go home on leave for a few days before I shipped out. I had gotten home and spent time with everyone and learned a very weird and scary situation had occurred just a few days prior. Apparently, my neighbor's kids were outside playing when an eerie black van pulled up to their house and almost abducted the 2 youngest kids. I say almost because the father was fast to reacting, grabbing his handgun and shooting the bastard in the leg. What made it so weird was that the man was dressed up as a clown. The man was arrested, and when I got home I learned about the incident. I had spoke to the father of the children, making sure everyone was safe, and he said that they had had some very strange phone calls coming in all hours of the day the past week. He only figured that the calls were linked. I told him about the incident with Kayla and Oscar, and all he could say about it was, "Fucking weirdos." Was this linked too? Was the clown my brother Oscar had seen that time the same one who tried to abduct those 2 neighbor kids? Or just entirely coincidence? All I can really say is, if this ever happens to my family, I won't be aiming for the leg. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. So I'd like to give a really quick shout out to a couple of people. The first one being Deanna, my thumbnail artist. She does some amazing work, and I highly recommend you go check out her website in the description. As well as checking out her website, make sure you go check out Joe Becker, who makes some of the tunes for my videos. His website isn't just music, it actually somewhat revolves around horror, because believe it or not, his family is actually linked to one of the oldest televised hauntings. I highly recommend you go check out his website, as well as Deanna's. And if you're looking for even more stories, make sure you're subscribed to my second channel, Fear Urmaker. I hope you all have a great day, and be careful of those clowns out there. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.